Iran just broke the blockade, not by firing a single missile, not by closing the strait, by doing something that every military planner, every intelligence analyst, and every White House strategist failed to put in the high probability column. And the consequences are already burning across 4 continents. Stay with me, because what happened in the last 72 hours changes everything you thought you knew about this confrontation. And I'm going to show you exactly how. If you've been following this story, share this video right now, because the next few minutes are going to explain something the mainstream press is not telling you clearly. For 63 days, the American naval blockade of Iranian ports was doing exactly what it was designed to do. $500 million a day bleeding out of the Iranian state. The regime that has destabilized the Middle East for 45 years was being squeezed, systematically, economically, without a single American casualty. The blockade was working. Washington was watching the numbers and waiting for Tehran to blink. Iran didn't blink. It restructured. And that restructuring just became visible all at once, in multiple domains simultaneously, in a way that is rewriting the strategic map of the region in real time. Here is what Iran actually did. Here is how it did it. And here is why the next 72 hours may be the most dangerous window the Middle East has seen since the 2003 Iraq invasion. The entire blockade rested on a single premise: cut off Iran's oil revenue long enough, and internal economic pressure will force a genuine nuclear concession. That premise had historical support. The sanctions campaign of 2013 to 2015 helped drive Iran to the JCPOA negotiations. The architects of the blockade assumed Iran's only choices were to absorb the pain or negotiate. They did not fully model a third option: not absorbing, not negotiating, restructuring. Iran spent 63 days looking like it was absorbing the pressure. It was actually doing something else entirely. And when the restructuring became visible, it became visible everywhere at once. Here is the first move Iran made. And this one should alarm every person watching this who buys gasoline, pays a heating bill, or has a pension fund. China's state-owned energy enterprises, CNPC, CNOOC, the major state companies that had been carefully keeping their distance from sanctioned Iranian crude to protect their access to the dollar system, made a calculation. They decided the American blockade had crossed a line, not a moral line, a strategic one. The line where allowing a Chinese strategic partner to be economically strangled without any response sends every other nation a message. American financial coercion has no cost. Chinese state tankers, not independent refineries, state enterprise vessels, began loading Iranian crude through ship-to-ship transfers in international waters in the Gulf of Oman. The blockade covers Iranian ports. It does not cover international water transfers. Iran and China found the gap and moved through it immediately. The volume doesn't replace all of Iran's lost revenue, but it changes the economic math enough to give Tehran breathing room. And here is the compounding piece. Several countries watching China push back without immediate American retaliation are now quietly reassessing their own compliance. Turkey, India, several African nations. The blockade worked when universal compliance was the assumption. That assumption just broke. If that's the story you came for, drop a comment below telling me which part of this you think is being most underreported. I read every one, and your answers shape what we cover next. Now here is the second move. And this one has blood on it. Hezbollah. Not the degraded post-2024 Hezbollah that the world assumed was too weakened to conduct serious operations. The reconstituted Hezbollah. The one Iran has been quietly rearming and reorganizing for 6 months, while global attention was locked on the Strait of Hormuz. In the last 72 hours, Hezbollah activated at a scale Israeli military commanders are calling the largest coordinated operation since the 2006 war. Thousands of rockets launched in coordinated salvos, specifically engineered to saturate Iron Dome and David's Sling, by presenting more simultaneous inbound threats than the intercept systems can handle at full probability. Confirmed strikes in Haifa, Kiryat Shmona, communities along the northern border that spent 18 months trying to return to normal life. They are not normal. And simultaneously, same 72-hour window, Houthi forces in Yemen escalated Red Sea operations to the highest tempo since the American naval deployment began. 5 commercial vessels targeted in 24 hours. 2 confirmed struck. One tanker on fire in the Gulf of Aden. Shipping insurance rates that had been recovering are spiking violently again. Iran activated every proxy at the same moment. Hezbollah in the north, Houthis in the south, Iranian-aligned Iraqi militias attacking American positions. 3 separate incidents in 48 hours. The multi-front pressure architecture that Iran spent years building is now generating force simultaneously across the entire theater. Israel is now facing a military situation with no clean solution. And the absence of a clean solution is precisely what Iran engineered. Option 1. A ground operation into Lebanon. Israel did this in 2006. It was costly, inconclusive, and ended with Hezbollah more powerful than before. Doing it now, while simultaneously managing Gaza, the threat of direct Iranian strikes, and a northern rocket campaign against Israeli civilians, is an enormous operational commitment that Israeli planners have been reluctant to make without far more favorable conditions. Option 2. Continue the air campaign. Israel has been conducting targeted strikes against Hezbollah infrastructure for 18 months and has degraded significant capability. It has not stopped thousands of rockets from launching in a 72-hour window. The rockets already distributed across southern Lebanon don't disappear from the air. Option 3. Strike Iran directly. The option Netanyahu has been building toward. The option the entire American military presence in the region was designed to enable. But here is the problem, and here is the part nobody is saying clearly enough. Striking Iran in the middle of a Hezbollah rocket campaign against Israeli cities means Israeli air defense assets are simultaneously managing inbound rockets from Lebanon and incoming Iranian retaliation. The timing is catastrophic for Israel, which means it is perfect for Iran. Hezbollah was activated to make the timing catastrophic. The chaos is not an accident. The chaos is the strategy. Let's talk about the piece that is getting almost no coverage proportionate to its importance. The Gulf states are fracturing. The informal security alignment between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and the United States. The alignment that has been the foundation of American regional strategy for 4 decades is under more stress right now than at any point in the last 20 years. Saudi Arabia's oil terminals received credible targeting intelligence in the last 48 hours, indicating imminent Houthi attack. Saudi Aramco activated emergency protocols at 2 major facilities. That is not a routine security posture. That is a signal that the energy security apparatus of the world's largest oil exporter believes a strike is genuinely imminent. Saudi Arabia is asking Washington the question it has asked repeatedly throughout this confrontation. Will you respond decisively? Not proportionally, not in a managed and calibrated way, but in a way that actually removes the threat. The answer it keeps receiving is calibrated and proportional. That is not the answer Riyadh is looking for. The UAE is privately questioning whether the security guarantee embedded in its American partnership is reliable enough to justify the political exposure that the Abraham Accords created. Qatar, which hosts Al Udeid Air Base and has been the critical American logistics hub throughout this confrontation, is receiving Iranian back-channel pressure. Messages that its role in enabling American operations is noted and will have consequences. The Gulf states are not abandoning the American alignment, but they are hedging, quietly, in the specific ways nations hedge when they're not sure the relationship they've been depending on will hold under maximum pressure. Now let's talk about what you're paying at the pump, because this is where the crisis leaves the map and enters your daily life. Brent crude moved from approximately $95 per barrel to $127 per barrel in 48 hours. $32 in 2 days. Let that number settle. That is not gradual repricing of geopolitical risk over weeks. That is a market in genuine distress, pricing the multi-front escalation, the Hezbollah activation, the Houthi shipping attacks, and the Gulf infrastructure threats as scenarios it had been discounting as unlikely. The market just revised that estimate dramatically. The near-month futures contracts, this week, next week, are moving most violently. That means the market believes something physical is about to happen to actual oil supply in the next few weeks, not next year. Tanker operators who had cautiously resumed Gulf transit are pulling back. Freight rates are spiking to levels not seen since the worst of the Red Sea disruption. Every barrel of oil that comes from this region now carries a higher risk premium. And that premium lands on consumers in every country on Earth, because energy prices feed into the cost of everything else. Here is what the President of the United States is now facing. The blockade was Trump's instrument, the mechanism through which he planned to force Iran to negotiate without requiring the military action his base explicitly does not want. That instrument has been partially circumvented by Chinese state enterprise transfers in international waters. To respond, Trump can sanction those Chinese state enterprises. But sanctioning Chinese state enterprises means sanctioning Chinese state enterprises. That is not a minor diplomatic action. That is a direct confrontation with the Chinese state at a level of economic warfare that carries consequences for global financial markets, for bilateral relations, and for the supply chains American consumers depend on. He has been managing the Iran confrontation while managing the China trade relationship. Those two managed tensions just collided. Option 1. Sanction, escalate with Beijing, risk a counter-response. Option 2. Accept the circumvention, acknowledge the blockade has been partially broken, absorb the credibility loss. Neither is good. The decision still has to be made. And while it's being made, Israeli civilians are absorbing rockets, Saudi Aramco is on emergency footing, and oil is at $127. His base doesn't want a Middle East war. His base also doesn't want $6 gasoline. Those two things are now very difficult to reconcile simultaneously. Watch this space, because that dilemma is going to force a visible decision within days. And when you understand what the options actually are, the outcome will make sense to you in a way it won't to most people. Stay with this story. The actor watching all of this with undisguised strategic satisfaction is Russia. Russia's relationship with Iran has been reset to a transactional basis following the intelligence fracture we covered in a previous report. But transactional is sufficient. Iran's multi-front escalation is producing outcomes that serve Russian interests across multiple theaters simultaneously. American attention, assets, and political capital are being consumed by the Middle East at maximum intensity. American carrier groups are concentrated in the Gulf and Red Sea. American diplomatic bandwidth is saturated with Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the China sanctions dilemma, and the oil market crisis. All of that is bandwidth not being applied to Ukraine. Russia doesn't need to coordinate with Iran explicitly. Both parties simply need the same things to happen. And right now, the same things are happening. Here is the piece that converts all of this from strategically dangerous to genuinely terrifying. The nuclear clock is still running. 12 days to weapons-grade material, while rockets are hitting Israeli cities, while tankers burn in the Gulf of Aden, while oil sits at $127, and Washington manages a China sanctions decision, and Riyadh activates emergency protocols. The centrifuges have not stopped. The enrichment has not paused. And every element of the multi-front escalation serves the nuclear program in exactly the same way. Each crisis creates pressure to de-escalate, to find an off-ramp, to accept a diplomatic arrangement that reduces the immediate violence, even if it does nothing about the underlying nuclear question. The Hezbollah rockets create pressure to stop Israeli civilians from dying. That pressure points toward a Lebanon ceasefire. A ceasefire creates a diplomatic process that reduces political space for a concurrent strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. The oil shock creates pressure to stabilize energy markets. Stabilizing markets requires reducing Strait disruption. Reducing Strait disruption requires diplomatic engagement with Iran. Diplomatic engagement creates process. Process buys time, days, weeks, however long it takes to cross the threshold that changes everything permanently. Iran is not fighting to win a conventional war. It is creating simultaneous crises to buy the time it needs to cross the nuclear line. The chaos is not a side effect. The chaos is the delivery mechanism. Here is what the Middle East on fire actually means in specific human terms, not metaphor. Lebanese civilians fleeing as Israeli counterstrikes hit Hezbollah launch positions and the villages surrounding them. Casualties confirmed on both sides of the border. Hospitals overwhelmed, populations displaced, infrastructure destroyed. Yemeni civilians in Houthi-controlled territory absorbing continued American and Allied strikes on Houthi military infrastructure. Gulf state populations in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar living under elevated security alerts, and the psychological weight of being targets in an active regional confrontation. Iraqi civilians caught between Iranian-aligned militias attacking American positions and American counterstrikes targeting those forces. The fragile Iraqi state, still attempting to function as a sovereign government, hosting both American forces and Iranian-aligned militias under maximum simultaneous institutional stress. And the economic dimension that reaches populations far beyond the conflict zone. The families in South Asia whose remittances from Gulf workers are threatened. The manufacturers in Europe and Asia absorbing spiking input costs. The consumers everywhere whose inflation is about to accelerate because energy prices filter through the price of every other thing. The decisions being made right now in Tehran, Washington, Tel Aviv, and Beijing, by people who will not personally experience the consequences, are what is producing every single one of those specific harms. Is there a way out? Let's be direct about it. There is always a negotiated arrangement. There is always a framework that creates a pause. The question is what any arrangement preserves and what it sacrifices. Iran wants sanctions relief substantial enough to restore its oil revenue, withdrawal of the blockade, and a face-saving nuclear framework it can present domestically as a victory, while retaining enough enrichment capacity to restart whenever international attention moves elsewhere. America wants verifiable cessation of enrichment above civilian energy levels, verifiable disposition of the existing near-weapons-grade stockpile, and IAEA access that actually means something, in exchange for sanctions relief sufficient to allow the Iranian economy to function. The gap between those two positions is enormous, but the current chaos creates pressure on both sides simultaneously. Iran is spending its proxy assets at a rate that degrades them. Hezbollah rockets intercepted by Iron Dome are drawn from a finite inventory. Houthi operations absorbing American strikes are losing capability. Iraqi militias drawing counterstrikes are taking losses. The chaos costs Iran something too, and China, watching oil at $127 with genuine alarm, knowing that Chinese consumers and manufacturers pay directly for every dollar of that price, has tolerance limits for the disruption that its Iranian partnership is generating. Those limits are being approached. A narrow off-ramp exists. It requires Iran to accept genuine nuclear constraints, not cosmetic ones. It requires America to accept that Iran continues as a regional power rather than being dismantled. Whether either side walks through it depends on whether the pain of continuation reaches the threshold that makes compromise preferable. That threshold may be approaching faster than the public rhetoric of either side suggests. Here is the operational timeline. The next 72 hours. The Hezbollah rocket campaign either intensifies, plateaus, or begins to taper as Israeli counterstrikes degrade launch infrastructure. If it intensifies, Israel's calculus on a Lebanon ground operation shifts. The cost of inaction becomes visible in civilian casualties that Israeli domestic politics cannot sustain. If it plateaus, Israel regains operational timing and can choose its next move rather than reacting to Iran's. In the 72 to 96-hour window, Washington faces the China State Enterprise sanctions decision. Sanction and escalate, or accept the circumvention and absorb the credibility damage. Neither exit is clean. The decision happens anyway. In the 5 to 7 day window, the nuclear clock. If the chaos continues without a diplomatic breakthrough, breakout timeline compresses further. At some point in that window, military commanders in Israel and the United States brief their political leadership that the technical window for a comprehensive nuclear strike is closing. That briefing forces a decision. Strike or accept a nuclear Iran. Those are the options at the end of the window. And the window is shorter than the noise around it suggests. We are tracking every development as it happens and publishing our analysis daily. This story is moving faster than any weekly recap can cover. If today's breakdown gave you clarity that you could not find elsewhere, then you already know what to do. Drop a comment right now with the one question about this crisis that you most want answered. Your questions drive our daily coverage. And if you want the next briefing the moment it publishes, not a day later, not buried in a feed, then subscribe. Hit the bell. We update this story every single day, and the next 72 hours are going to matter.